Physical science is the study of non-living things. It's the ability to use logic and reasoning to explain what goes on in the world around us. It's also the study of matter and its motion and behavior through space and time, along with related concepts such as energy and force. Physics looks at how things happen and is the reason why things happen. We can also discover more about how stars are made and how we can generate energy and power for ourselves. Have you ever wondered what would happen if your tongue stuck onto an ice-cold frozen pole? How is sound and light energy important to our existence? And can we exist with one and not the other? How does gravity, electricity, and magnetism affect our natural world? How and why substances combine or separate to form other substances?
Economics. Please welcome Mr. Mtramu. I'm here with you again to take you on the economic pursuit. Remember, this is one of our paper one, a topic or content, which is normally the part of our section A, section B, which is question 3 and the part of question 4, as well as our section C, which is question 6. So the topic we are doing is protectionism and free trade. So please join me. Let's see what we have for you. So these are the lesson objectives that will be achieved in the course of this lesson. The lesson will allow you to be able to discuss export promotion in detail. That means that's a part of an essay if ever it should be discussed in detail. It will allow you to be able to discuss import substitution. And then you will be able to discuss in detail arguments of protectionism. You will be able to explain the arguments in favor of free trade. It will also allow you to briefly explain the desirable mix or economic integration. And then the following are the concepts that are very much necessary for you to understand this lesson. Remember, these concepts are very much also important for your section A. So firstly, we have African Continental Free Trade Area, which is the African Continental Free Trade Area is a free trade area founded in 2018 with the trade commencing as of 1 January 2021. It was created by the African Continental Free Trade Agreement among 54 of the 55 African Union countries or nations. The BRICS, an association of emerging economies consisting of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Disinvestment. This is the withdrawal of capital investment from a company or a country. The dumping refers to the selling goods in a foreign country at a lower price than the cost of production in the country of origin. Embargo. It's an official state ban on trade or other activities with a particular country. Export promotion refers to incentive to encourage the production of goods that can be exported. It is a part of South Africa's international trade policy. Globalization. It's a worldwide interaction of economies with trade as an important element. We continue with technology. Import substitution. These are goods that were previously imported are replaced with locally produced goods. It is a part of South Africa's trade policy. Mercosur, an organization to promote free trade amongst Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. New Partnership for African Development, which is NEPAD, provides for regional cooperation and integration among African states. Protectionism. It's a trade policy that keeps the domestic economy safe by restricting the import of certain goods and services. South African Development Community, SADC, an economic and monetary union comprising of Botswana, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Lesotho, Malawi, Mauritius, Mozambique, Namibia, Seychelles, South Africa, Swaziland, Tanzania, Zambia, and Zimbabwe, which allows imports from member states to qualify for duty-free access to other member states or countries. Sanctions refers to a penalty applied by one or more countries to another country. Trade liberation, the abolition of government intervention in trade flows on both the import and export side. Protocol, the establishment of code of procedure or behavior in any group or organization, the official procedure governing the affairs of state, e.g., cultural activities and international affairs. And then we continue with terminology. We have the import substitution. This one has been mentioned. All of these ones have been mentioned. So let's go back a little bit to the structure of the lesson. Okay, this is the lesson body. So in the lesson body, the main thing, you must be able to provide the definition for the export promotion, and then you must know the methods or approaches to export promotion. Then you must also know reasons or advantages of export promotion as well as disadvantages. So, just for a preview, if we talk of the export promotion, we talk about the policy by the government, which is mainly aiming at promoting or encouraging locally produced goods and services to be sold abroad or to be exported into the global market or foreign market. That is the export promotion. And if the government get to be involved through the export promotion, there are some benefits that are given to businesses so that they can be encouraged to even produce more and supply more into the international markets. So that talks to export subsidies. It talks to export incentives. Incentives can be financial and non-financial. So those are the benefits that are extended to businesses that they enjoy in order to be able to produce more goods and services and supply the global market. So the export promotion have got its own advantages and or reasons that are very much necessary. For instance, if ever the country is involved in the export promotion policy, it tends to be easy for it to have export-oriented economic growth. And with export promotion in place, what happens? The employment opportunities are always there because these local firms will produce more goods and services, which means there will be more desire for what? For unemployed people that are skilled for the relevant production. Also, this export promotion will always lead to increased GDP of the country. Also, it earns the foreign currency. Remember, as much as the country is earning more foreign currency, that lead to the social welfare gain because there will be more income flowing into the country because of exported goods and services. Those are net exports. And then, if ever the export promotion is successful for the country, that simply lead to the reduced BOP deficit. If ever there are more goods being exported, the trade deficit is reduced in the current account, which work in favor of the whole or entire balance of payments. So those are just the claims of the export promotion, which can be reasons and advantages. And then within methods, I've just mentioned that we have approaches which include, or methods that include export subsidies and then incentives that are given to businesses. In those incentives, we can talk about tax exemption, tax rebates, and we call those ones the indirect subsidies because we have a direct subsidy and indirect subsidy. A direct subsidy is a cash or grant given by the government to the business. Indirect subsidy, it does not include government spending the most. So that one does not give a business a pure cash, but there will be benefits to be enjoyed by businesses at the expense of the government. And then we have some disadvantages to say what is bad about export promotion policy. At times, if ever the country is mostly investing in export promotion, foreign countries might retaliate by imposing more tariffs on South African exported goods and services or South African exports because they might be cheaper and might be seen as dumping. Remember, if the country is supporting its own firm to produce to export into the global market, that simply lead to South African goods appearing more cheap in the foreign market or international market, which is bad for those countries, firms or businesses because South African goods will be more cheap while their goods are expensive. So export promotion have this tendency of driving out some firms from the market. And also it's bad because if ever the government decides to withdraw its own subsidies and benefits given to exporting businesses, firms cannot be able to compete in the open market. It will be difficult for them to adapt in the open market where there is no government intervention. Also, the prices that are set in there by business are distorted. Why are we saying that? We are saying that because businesses sometimes do not get to know the actual cost of production. Because of the inclusion of a subsidy, they simply assume they are doing very well, while they are not doing well due to the fact that there are subsidies given by the government as a part of the production process. So they find themselves producing more goods, only to find that they are not really efficient. They are simply boosted by the export promotion. Also, the other thing is that the government tend to intervene into the business if ever it determines prices for its goods in the global market. As the government intervenes because government is mainly focused on the international relations of countries. So the government will not allow firms to sell their goods at the higher cost. So with that being done by the government, it compromises firms, businesses, because sometimes they have huge profit margins, only to find that government will intervene and simply instruct them to set lower prices because of its intervention through subsidies. So let's go on and see what we have in details. Export promotion involves providing incentive to encourage local businesses to produce goods for the export. So mainly, it focuses on issuing incentives. That's when the government intervenes by giving local business incentives or subsidies so that they can be supported to produce more goods and services for the global market or the international market. It is the government's strategy to promote local businesses to produce more goods and services for the foreign market. So the government tries to promote our local firms to produce more goods and services and sell them into the global market through what? The export promotion policy. The export promotion is the outward-looking policy of exports and international competitiveness. So mainly, the export promotion tries to promote our local businesses to be very much competitive in the global market or international market, because if they can be able to compete with those big firms abroad, they can simply adapt and dominate and also be very much competent. So it's very important for our local firm to be competent in the entire market so that they can be able to promote our goods or locally produced goods and services. It can also be defined as measures taken by the government to increase the quantity and variety of goods and services that are exported. Mainly, it's focused on ensuring that variety of goods are exported into the global market or into the international markets. So the reasons for the export promotion. It aims at achieving significant export-driven economic growth. So the aim is to ensure that the country is able to achieve export-driven economic growth. Export promotion policies improve the productive capacity of the country since it leads to establishment of new businesses. So this simply means with the export promotion policy in place, that will encourage the establishment of new businesses within the country. So there will be businesses being established by local investors within the country because of the export promotion. Firms will be attracted by incentives and subsidies to produce goods and sell them into the international market, and that lead to the establishment of new businesses within the country, which is good for the economy. Large-scale production takes place. So with the export promotion policy being in place, firms produce more goods and services. They produce at the large scale, and also they find themselves producing at the economies of scale, which have a positive impact on job creation. So our local firms can be able to create more jobs, and that can lead to our local firms being able to compete in bigger markets, which include various competitors that are coming from various countries. So this simply leads to large-scale production or mass production. Our firms can be able to produce more goods and services at a short period of time because they are attracted by incentives and they want to export into the global market. So mass production leads to lower cost per unit. Local can be competitive in the international market. So our local firms can simply be competitive because they will be producing at the mass production or large-scale production, and that will lead to goods being produced at the lower cost per unit and also be sold at the lower cost per unit. We continue with reasons. The first step towards export-driven growth is to implement policies that encourage establishment of new industries. Mainly, if ever the country is investing mostly on export promotion, there will be new firms being established so that it can be able to produce a variety of goods and services. The export promotion does not focus only in one industry. Various industries should be involved so that the country will be able to be competitive in the entire global market. So establishment of businesses is more evident if ever export promotion is in place. Improving the performance of manufacturing and service industries. So manufacturing sector and service sector tend to improve very much because now they have the pressure of producing for the entire market. They must always meet international standards as they produce goods and services. Ensuring the optimal use of resources. If ever export promotion is in place, resources are not underutilized. They are used accordingly. They are used at their highest level, especially in refining and processing of natural resources. So this leads to efficient use of resources that are available within the country. They are not underused because of great demand for those goods and services in the international market. Export promotion enlarges the production capacity of the country. Yes. If ever export promotion is in place, there will always be more productive capacity for the country. The country cannot produce less because as it produces for the local market and also international market that are in need of the local product. So it enlarges what we call the production capacity of the country. So these are the methods or approaches that will be explained. We talk about the direct subsidies, which I said talks to the cash or grant. It's a cash or grant given by the government to local exporting businesses in order to support them to produce more goods and services at the lower cost. And then we have indirect subsidies. In here, we talk about subsidies that do not include cash being given to businesses, but these are the benefits extended by the government to business for them to be able to produce more goods and services at the lower cost. And then we talk about the trade neutrality, which will be explained because it is having a lot of details, and then incentives that are provided by the government. And then direct subsidy or subsidies. An export subsidy is a payment to a domestic producer who export their goods abroad. So a subsidy mainly, or export subsidy mainly refer to a payment given by the government to whom? To local producers or domestic producers as they produce goods to export them into the international market. These measures are described as direct subsidies because they result to the government spending. The government spends because the government pay out money to these businesses for them to be able to finance their own production process. It refers to cash grant paid by the government to locally exporting businesses as a financial support to increase their production. So it's a cash given by the government to local firms that are producing to the international market so that they can be able to produce more goods and services. So it's mainly the financial support given to these firms that are producing to the global market by the local government just to encourage them to produce more goods and services. Directly subsidized businesses have an ability to produce at the lower cost, increase international competitiveness, explore and establish markets overseas. So if ever businesses are subsidized directly, it's always easy for them to produce at the lower cost per unit. Also becoming more competitiveness or competitive in the global market. Their level of competitiveness increases because they are supported by the government. They have financial support. They explore, and also it is easy for them to establish markets overseas or abroad. So it becomes easy for them because they are backed by the government through this financial support that we call subsidies. And then we talk of indirect subsidies. Indirect subsidies do not result to the government expenditure. So in this case, it does not result, it is not a part of cash given by the government to these businesses. They are exemptions given to exporting businesses. So these are concessions or exemptions that are extended by the government to exporting businesses or locally exporting businesses for them to be able to produce more goods and services, and also not to incur more cost of production. And then indirect subsidies have the same effect as direct subsidies because they result to exporting firms using their discounts to increase the productive capacity. Of course, even though it's an indirect subsidy, but businesses find themselves not having to pay for whatever that they have been exempted to. So in that case, they find themselves taking the amount of money that was supposed to be paid maybe for taxation and they finance their own production process, which is the same as the way in which government provide them with a cash in the terms of direct subsidies, and they are able to finance their very own spending. So they have the very same effect, but they are not the same because one is cash, one is not financial involved. It's the matter of discount or exemptions. I mean, it includes the likes of tax rebates, tax exemptions, or we call tax exemptions are known as tax concessions, and then government surety, as well as refunding on import tariffs. So if we talk about tax rebates, we talk about situation whereby the firm is liable to pay for its company tax. It will pay the full 28%, but the government will be able to refund it with a certain percentage of that kind of a taxation. That's a tax rebate. And then tax exemption, this occurs when firms are excluded to pay a certain percentage of tax. If the taxation should be 28%, maybe the government will say, okay, since we are promoting, you just pay only 15%. That means 13% will not be paid. So that's a tax exemption. Firms are excluded or given a green light not to pay a certain percentage of tax. So we call that what? A tax, what is a concession. The firm is given that allowance that is not given to the rest of businesses because this one is promoted by the government. And then we talk about the government surety. In this case, we refer to export credit or discounts given by the government to whom? To local firms that are producing goods for the international market. How does it happen? The government surety refers to an informal agreement between the firm that is exporting, the government, and the commercial bank to give a firm a credit or a capital or a loan at the lower interest rate at the expense of the government, then the government will be liable to pay that discounted interest rate. But then the firm will be able to access loan at the lower interest rate than the actual one because of the government involvement. So those firms are the ones that are producing to export into the global market. And then we talk about refunding on import tariffs. So this simply occurs if ever the firm have paid a tariff abroad when it was exporting its goods, which become as an import in that particular country, the government will give them refund back on their paid import tariffs. Tax rebate refer to the tax refund, refunds given to exporting businesses to increase their production for foreign markets. Yes, it's simply a refund on taxation. They pay their taxation on their profit, and then the government will be able to refund them. So that is what a tax rebate. And then tax exemption. It refers to the tax discount given to exporting business as a support so that they can increase their production. These are also known as tax concession on profits earned by exporting businesses. That's when businesses are excluded from paying a certain percentage of tax by the government. We call that a tax exemption. Tax rebate occurs when exporting businesses are given back a portion of taxation they paid to be directed to production. So they receive a certain percentage that has already been paid. That's the tax rebate. Refunding on import tariffs. So companies often use imported machines to produce goods. Exporting businesses are refunded their import duties on equipment. Whenever these firms are importing equipment or machinery to produce goods for the international market, they are given their refund, or they are refunded their import tariff that they paid when they're importing goods. And then we continue with the indirect subsidies. The government surety. So it is the interest rate discount given to exporting businesses to increase their production. So businesses that are exporting are given the discount on interest in case they need the capital from commercial bank. Then the government will give them that support of lower interest rate than the normal or the actual interest rate. So that benefits whom? That benefits those exporting businesses at the expense of the government, because they are able to finance their own production process using these discounts. Government surety contains a formal agreement between the exporting business, the government, and a commercial bank to give a capital to exporting business at the lower interest rate at the expense of the government. So in this case, like I've said before, the government allow or formulate the agreement between itself, the commercial bank that is holding on the capital, as well as the firm that is exporting goods into the global market. That agreement will be created, and it allows the firm to access the capital or the credit in the commercial bank at the lower interest rate than the actual one, which is payable by the government, meaning at the expense of the government. Incentives. Incentive and support are given to companies to encourage them to export larger portion of their production to foreign markets. So the main thing is to ensure that firms are able to export larger portion of their production. Hence, they are given incentives by the state or by the government. The purpose of incentives is to encourage exporters to export more by giving them financial assistance. So in this case, the government tries to ensure that it provides this incentive to this business so they can well be encouraged to export more goods and services through this financial assistance given to them. Incentives enable local exporting businesses to be competitive in the international markets without financial constraints. So with businesses giving incentives, they tend not to be very much challenged by financial issues because the government get to be involved and give them those concessions and discounts that allow them to produce more goods and services at the lower cost. Exporting businesses enjoy benefits such as free advisory schemes, business intelligence, cheap freight, low-cost storage, marketing, and advertising. So in this case, the government can intervene by ensuring that the locally exporting business is getting, or those people or those employees are getting ongoing training, which is a part of the free advisory and business intelligence. Entrepreneurs are well trained without having to pay anything so that they will be able to adapt to the international market that is too large. And then cheap freight, that's when businesses transport their goods and sell into the global market at the lower cost than actual cost. Low cost storage, as businesses have to store their goods before they leave or when they have already left, businesses need to pay for storage. But with this case, low-cost storage benefits businesses not to pay a large or a huge amount of money for storing their goods into the harbor so that they can be able to export them into the global market. Marketing and advertising. The government at times take responsibility by ensuring that it does marketing and advertising on behalf of businesses so that they can get a good publicity in the foreign market. The government, through the Department of Trade and Industry and the competition, which is, Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, which is DTIC, pay for all of these benefits extended to exporters. So, with this department, the government is responsible to pay for all of these costs that are extended to exporters so that they can be able to produce more goods and services at the lower cost. We'll continue with incentives. So information on export markets. That's when the government try to ensure that it discover as much as possible information about international market of that particular product for the firm. So that whenever the product from South Africa get there, the product is well known. The product can easily compete with those other foreign products. Research with regards to new market is conducted on behalf of the local exporters so that they can be effective. So the government takes responsibility to ensure that the research is done on that particular product and that particular market so that whenever these goods are leaving the country, they are able to easily compete and be effective. Concessions on transport or transport charges from interior to harbors, for example, are given to exporters to ease transport cost burden. So the transport cost concessions or discounts are given to local exporting business so that it can ease the burden in terms of cost of transporting and production of their goods and services. Export credit and export credit and export guarantees is given to exclusively to exporters to access required capital. In this case, under export credit, we talk about mainly there is a government surety involved in there, whereby exporting business will have to access, will be able to access loans or capital at the lower interest than the actual one. And then advantages of the export promotion. What is good about export promotion? Expansion to internal markets. So if ever export promotion is in place, it will be easy for local goods to expand into the international market or foreign markets. There will be a lower level of unemployment because export promotion creates job opportunities, reduce prices. There will be a lower prices prevailing because subsidies given by the government and all of these incentives given by the government result to goods sold at the lower cost. Stabilizes the currency. Yes, our currency can a little bit be stabilized because of the export promotion policy, since we can be able to supply our currency into the global market while we are demanding their currency. Improve BOP or balance of payment. Our trade balance in the current account tend to be a little bit stabilized because of maybe level of exports increases more than the level of imports. Diversify the economy. So in this case, there will be a variety of goods and services produced within the domestic economy. That is caused by what? The export promotion, meaning firms are able to produce the variety of goods, which is known as economic diversity. So the advantage is continuous. Expansion into the international markets. International markets are much bigger than the local markets. We know that once the firm get to be involved in the international market, it can easily grow faster because those markets are bigger than our local markets. Our local markets are too small as compared to the foreign or international markets. Export promotion enables producers to produce large output to supply large international markets. So these export promotion policies allow local businesses to produce large output so that they can be able to supply the entire global market. This creates an opportunity of economies of scale, mass production, specialization, and division of labor. So with this export promotion being in place, there will be an opportunity to economies of scale, meaning business can be able to produce more goods and services at the lower cost, sell them at the lower cost. There will be a mass production, meaning production in large quantities or large scale production will be in place or will occur because of the export promotion. Specialization. At times, businesses choose or decide to choose a particular product that where they can produce at the lower cost and sell at the lower cost, spending less economic resources. Then they decide to specialize on that particular product. And then the division of labor. in that case. That's when there will be a skilled labor responsible. We have a semi-skilled labor responsible and non-skilled labor. So with what we call the international market or export promotion being in place, the labor can be used effectively because it's highly demanded to produce goods and services. Producers are then empowered to optimize their utilization of resources and become more competitive in the global market. With the export promotion, producers tend to be very much efficient. They use their resources at the optimal level. They don't underutilize resources because it is very important for them to produce as much as possible goods and services so that they can be able to meet the requirements of the international standards as they demand goods and services. Decrease the level of unemployment. The increase in productive capacity for the country increases the demand for labor. If ever we have export promotion, there will be a demand for labor because for these goods to be produced, labor should be involved. So as a result, there will be increase in demand for labor because of what we call export promotion policy. Increased employment is a mechanism to poverty alleviation. With employment increasing, there will be a poverty relief because as people receive income, they will be able to spend on their basic goods and services. High employment creates an opportunity for government to earn tax. So the government will be able to earn more tax revenues in that case on income and consumer spending. Remember, that's a direct and indirect tax to make provision for public goods. So it allows the government to be able to earn more tax revenues and be able to provide public goods and services for the economy. We continue with advantages. Reduces prices. Large market sizes promote economies of scale, which reduces prices of goods and services. With firms producing at the economies of scale, they produce large quantity of goods and services at the lower cost, which lead to them selling goods at the lower cost. This increases standard of living because the volume of goods consumer can buy with less income increase. So if ever prices are lowered, consumers can afford more goods and services, which can lead to improved living standard and poverty alleviation. We continue with advantages and the foreign currency. Remember that once a particular firm export its goods, it will be having export earnings in a form of foreign currency. So export promotion and the foreign currency for the country. The increase in the volume of export increases the inflow of foreign currency and as an injection into South African economy. With large number of exports increasing in the country, that will lead to more inflow of the foreign currency as a payment for what we call payment for export. These increase the value of the domestic currency as foreign currencies are exchanged for rand. We continue with advantages. Improve the country's balance of payments. High level of export reduces trade deficit in the current account as more goods are exported. If ever the country is facing the situation of having more exports, that will automatically temper positive with the trade balance on the current account, which will result to trade balance being affected positive, and even current account might find itself overall being affected positive, which will reduce the balance of payment deficit in there. This reduces the country's balance of payment deficit and resolve the issue of balance of payment disequilibrium. So there will always be the situation whereby the balance of payment deficit will be reduced within the country if ever the level of exports is increasing more than the level of imports. Diversifies country's economy. So, like I've said, if ever export promotion is in place, variety of industries are established, variety of firms are established to produce variety of goods and services in the economy, which is known as economic diversity. Export promotion results to variety of goods produced by local producers as they expand. If ever local firms are expanding, they will be able to produce variety of goods and services, not focusing mainly on one industry. New businesses are established as they are attracted by government incentives. So there are more businesses being established by local investors because of involvement of government through incentives as well as subsidies. So variety of goods and services are produced within the local economy, and this can result to the country's economy becoming diversified. Because of these goods being produced within the local economy, variety of them, that can lead to our economy being diversified, having variety of goods being produced. So we call that economic diversity, or economy will be diversified because there will be variety of goods and variety of industries existing to produce different goods and services in the market. And then what is bad about export promotion? Prices are distorted, and then foreign producers are discouraged. And then local exported goods can be regarded as dumping. Local firms cannot compete in the open market. price wars can occur. So if we talk about distorted prices, we talk about prices that do not give a true reflection of the cost of production because of involvement of what? Of government incentives as well as subsidies. And also foreign producers might be discouraged. How? If our local goods are produced and be sold abroad at the lowest possible cost because of state intervention, you find that those foreign businesses are not having subsidies we enjoy as local or as South African business. Therefore, they will be discouraged to compete in the global market because they are not having subsidies that South Africa is having advantages on. Local exported goods might be regarded as dumping because of these goods being sold at the lowest possible cost abroad due to the fact that there are more subsidies and incentives. Those goods can be regarded as dumping abroad and there can be more restrictions. Remember, dumping is prohibited by the World Trade Organization. Local firms cannot compete in the open market. Once the government decides to withdraw or remove its own incentives and subsidies, local firms can shut down most of them because they cannot afford to do what? They cannot afford to compete in the open market where there is no government intervention. There might even be price wars because foreign businesses might find themselves competing with South African business over prices because of our local firms are selling at the lower cost because due to the fact that subsidies are in place. While foreign firms want to cope in the competition, so they find themselves also lowering prices to try and compete effectively with our locally exported goods and services. And then if we talk about distorted prices, price of products do not show a true reflection of the cost of production. Subsidies and incentives given to producers make goods appear more cheap than they are. So goods appear more cheap because of subsidies. So that results to firms not being able to discover actually the cost of production. So we find them having distorted prices. Prices play an important role in determining the demand and supply in the market economy. The state intervention on pricing result to less profits earned by businesses. The government intervened based on subsidies and incentive offered to ensure international relations and profit maximization. So we know that business will always try to maximize their profits, but the government will always try to ensure that it is having good international relations with foreign countries. So the government can intervene whenever the price should be determined and try to ensure that goods are sold at the lowest possible cost. And that is bad for businesses because now, if businesses are not able to have a say in prices that much, that will lead to them not being able to maximize profits the way they want it. And then we continue with advantages. Foreign producers can be discouraged. So cheap South African export result to less demand for foreign products in South Africa. This drives foreign producers out of the market. Foreign producers can find themselves being neglected by consumers and they will end up leaving the market. This deprives local consumers of having a wide variety of goods to choose from. And then we continue with disadvantages. Local exports can be seen as dumping in the global market. Dumping occurs when the firm sells its goods in a foreign country at the lower cost or lower price than in the domestic market. This enables the firm to gain market share and push local producers out of the market. So local producers can find themselves leaving the market because of they are selling goods at the lowest possible cost, which is seen as dumping in the foreign market. It can be against the spirit of the provision of the World Trade Organization, which is WTO, because it discourages what we call the dumping. South African exports can be seen as dumping in foreign markets and be restricted through high tariffs to discourage the demand. So foreign governments can intervene by imposing more tariffs on South African goods because those goods are simply seen as dumping. Some of them can be banned because they are believed to be of poor quality. So many strategies can be used in there to discourage the level of exported goods if they are sold at the lower cost abroad. We continue with disadvantages. Local firms cannot compete in the open market. With more dependence on the government support, that can lead to local firms not being effective to compete abroad. Because if ever the government can remove its own subsidies, firms cannot stand the competition that is global. If government withdraw its subsidies, these firms cannot survive the open market competition, and as a result, they will be forced out of the market. Once the government intervenes by withdrawing some of its subsidies and incentives, firms can find it difficult to openly compete in the market. They cannot stand the actual cost of production if all benefits offered by the government have been withdrawn. Once the government intervened by withdrawing some benefits that were given to these firms, that will lead to this business finding it's very much expensive to produce goods for the export market. And some of them will end up not even doing so because of higher cost of production. And then import substitution. Remember, we have export promotion, which goes with the methods or approaches, reasons or advantages as well as disadvantages. Now we talk about the opposite, which is the import substitution. And then talking about the import substitution, it's all about replacing former imported goods and services with the locally produced goods and services. If ever the government try to use import substitution policy, it is trying to achieve long-term policy. It's trying to achieve long-term growth in the economy by compromising imported goods and services in order to support the local production of goods and services. So the import substitution can be done or can occur in two ways. These are forms, namely the voluntary import substitution as well as the forced import substitution. So the voluntary one occurs when the country decides on its own will to do what? To substitute a particular product by producing it locally. While the first one occurs when the country was given no choice but have been banned or sanctioned by some world countries not to participate in the global market or international trade. Then as a result, the country will decide on its own to establish its own industries to produce a particular product. For instance, in South Africa, the Armscor Ordinary was created or was established forcefully because of the country was sanctioned from being able to participate in the international trade back then. And then the what you call the Armscor is the first one. And then we have another one which is not forced, which is voluntary. In that case, we talk about the ISCO, the state firm, was established in South Africa so that they could be able to produce on their own without depending on the foreign producers. So there are two forms of import substitution that you have to just know them. And then the import substitution. Import substitution is a part of South African international trade policy. Import substitution is the replacement of goods that were previously imported with the local produced goods and services. So in this case, products that were produced and imported by foreign producers now are no longer imported, but we produce them in South Africa instead. So that's the import substitution. The import substitution policy can occur in two forms, namely the forced and voluntary. Forced import substitution occurs when the country is forced to produce a certain good on its own. It has been sanctioned or excluded to take part in the international trade. So this occurs if the country has been sanctioned or is excluded from participating in the foreign market. That one is forced. They don't have a choice but to do what? To produce their very own goods. And then voluntary import substitution occurs when the country decides to improve its industrial base by producing some goods that were former imports. So that one is known as voluntary import substitution. So what are the reasons for the import substitution? Reasons can be very simple. To diversify the local economy, meaning ensuring that local firms can be able to produce variety of goods and services within the domestic economy. That's when goods were previously imported are produced locally. Locally, domestic manufacturing expands and economy becomes less reliant on the foreign countries. So with this thing being in place or import substitution being in place, goods will be produced locally in large numbers, and those goods will be able to improve the local economy very easily, and the country will be less dependent in the foreign producers or foreign suppliers. Industrialization is promoted. So the development of new industries to produce previously imported goods and services can increase tax revenues and create more jobs. With the industrialization process being promoted, that will lead to those goods being produced locally, and there will be more tax revenues by the government and more job opportunities will be created by those firms that will be established. We continue with reasons. The balance of payment problem. So in this case, the BOP problem will be reduced because there will be less inflow of imported goods and services because these goods will now be produced locally. So if the deficit on the balance of payment is too high, a decrease in import can help to rectify this. So with more deficit, import substitution can result to less inflow of what? Less inflow of imports as a result. That will lead to BOP deficit being reduced. And then trade. Developing countries reliant on natural resources as a basis for growth and development limits their ability to grow. So it will always be easy for developing countries to trade effectively and grow within the international market if ever they are having their own goods and services, variety produced within the country. But if they depend on imports, it will be difficult for them to simply grow because they always import goods that are finished instead of trying to develop goods or produce goods on their own in order to improve the economy of the country. If these resources are used to produce goods and services which can be used domestically or exported, economic growth might be increased. With these being in place, we can come across economic growth occurring within the country or happening within the country. Then what are the methods of the import substitution? We talk about import tariffs, import quotas, and then we talk about some other methods such as administrative obstacles that are done by the government department to ensure that firms are not getting paperwork easily done. We talk about exchange rate control. We talk about diverting trade. That will be explained. So tariffs, which are the import duties or excise duties or import taxes, is one and the same thing. Import quotas. In this case, we talk about import limits, putting some limit on particular goods and so that can be imported into the local economy. Foreign exchange control. That's when the government ensure that it get to be involved, whereby if ever the foreign investor is willing to import goods or buy goods from South Africa or whatever, the investor will need to apply for local currency from the Reserve Bank, and that must be approved. Diverting trade, and then physical control, where we talk about the physical bans or trade embargo. And then these are the methods: tariffs, import duties, excise duties, or import taxes. A tariff is a tax on imports. They are introduced for the following reasons: to protect local producers against the foreign competition. We know that our local firms might be facing the high competition that is unfair to them. So they should be protected by what? By the use of tariffs, as tariffs are imposed on imports. To provide government with tax revenue. So the government tries to improve its own revenues because of the involvement of import tariffs. To make imports more expensive and therefore discourages the consumption of those goods. So imports become more expensive because of the import tariff. Then consumers tend to demand less of those goods because they become expensive in South Africa. Then they neglect them and demand the locally produced goods and services. Tariffs are separated into specific tariffs and ad valorem tariffs, as well as composite tariffs. We continue. Import quotas or import limits. Import quotas involve placing a restriction on the quantity of goods that may be imported. So the government intervened by setting the maximum limit in those particular goods. If ever those goods can be produced in South Africa, the government will set the limit for those goods from being imported so that they can also be supplied by local producers. This is done by to reduce the quantity of certain goods that are imported if the country can also produce them. Yeah, it is mainly done to minimize those goods that are imported while they can also be produced in the country. Import quotas influences the supply of and the price for imported goods and services, because if ever goods are if the government is very much strict, meaning import quotas will be too harsh, that will lead to those price of those goods becoming very expensive in South Africa. As a result, local consumers will be buying the locally produced goods. Import quotas can be general or discriminatory. So in general, it's whereby the limit is made to be the same to every importer, but if it's discriminatory, that's when limits are chosen. In a particular country, the limits are less. In a particular country, limits are more. In that case, we call them discriminatory import quotas. Foreign exchange control. That's when the government can be involved by limiting the amount of foreign currency available to importers. If ever importers want to import, it simply make the amount of local currency being less for them not to simply import in large quantity. Without the necessary currency, it is impossible to import goods from the rest of the world. The country for countries to import, they need to have a relevant currency. So without the currency being made available, the country cannot be able to import its goods. All foreign exchange earnings by residents are handed over the central bank. Those who need to make foreign payments apply to the central bank, who ration them. So applications are done via the central bank or reserve bank of the country, and then they can get to be approved and get that currency they need to pay their own or to pay for imports or exports. And then diverting trade. Diverting trade refers to measures taken by taken to make it difficult for importers to import goods, which include the following: import deposits. That's when businesses, for them to import their goods into the country, they need to pay a certain deposit in prior, which becomes a greater burden to them. Then they decide not to import their goods because of the deposit that should be paid. So government requires importers of certain goods to make a cash deposit equal to the fixed percentage of the value of the goods ordered. Administrative obstacles. This is more about time-consuming custom procedures or significant levels of paperwork, which discourages potential importers. That's why the government delays on issuing relevant documents to importers. Then they cannot be able to operate in the country without getting those relevant documents. These include certificate delays, delay in issuing travel documents, delay in in trading licenses. And then the methods continue. Diverting trade continues. The quality standards. That's when the government get to be involved by setting standards that should be met by foreign imported goods and or foreign produced goods and services, which are the imports. Government can specify the quality control standards such as licensing requirements, safety standards, and anti-pollution regulations for imported goods. These standards act as protective measures if the domestic producers are exempted from these standards. So these standards are only set for foreign producers or importers. They are not set for local producers. So they favor local producers to be able to enjoy in the local market than having the competition from abroad. Imports are required to meet those predetermined standards to earn approval into the local economy. We continue with method. Diverting trade continues again. Physical control. So this is all about complete ban or trade embargo when it is imposed on the imported goods of a particular country. So some goods can simply be banned to say we no longer need these goods in South Africa because they are harmful into the society, or maybe they are not good for the society. So those goods can be banned completely. That is known as to a physical control under the ban or trade embargo. This might be because goods are harmful in the society or they are of the poor quality. When certain products are banned, they forfeit legibility to be in that particular country. Once the country decides to ban the product, it will no longer be allowed to be in the country. So the local firms might take a responsibility to make the provision of those goods and services that have been banned. What is good about import substitution? Increased employment opportunities, improvement of countries' balance of payment, promotes countries' independence, and then also increases consumer choice and economic diversity. It also results to new business being established and then easy to implement. So disadvantage of import substitution: emerging economies cannot afford to decrease imports of certain goods. So disadvantages: it's always difficult for developing countries to reduce some of the goods and services that are imported because sometimes they cannot afford to produce them. So if ever import substitution takes place, it just takes place in specific goods that the country can be able to produce. To those goods that the country cannot afford to produce, there will be no import substitution because the country will be dependent more on the foreign countries to provide. Isolation from the international market. So if ever the country is using import substitution more aggressive, it can be, or its goods can be isolated in the international market. They can be excluded. Consumers pay higher prices for local goods. Local goods tend to be of poor quality at times if ever the foreign competition is no longer in place, and then they find themselves being exploited by producers or local producers to pay higher prices for those deficient goods. Retaliation. That occurs when foreign countries decide to impose more tariffs and quotas on our locally produced goods and so that have been exported to them. That's a part of retaliation because we have done the same to their goods and services. Dependence on government production. Local firms cannot easily grow because they mostly depend on the government production. If the government can withdraw its production, these businesses cannot afford to stand the competition because they are always dependent on the government to protect them against that foreign competition. The competition will decrease. So this leads to lower competition within the economy because foreign producers are no longer importing their goods into the South African economy, but local firms are only competing with one another, which create less room for innovation within the country's industries. So they tend to be less innovative because they are no longer facing that harsh competition from foreign producers. So inefficient production. Firms tend to be very much inefficient because of lack of competition. Unsuitable technology. So local firms cannot easily adapt to the latest technological trends because they are no longer facing that pressure of competition that was given by importers. Higher total cost. Local firms find themselves producing at the higher cost of production. Emerging economies cannot afford to decrease imports of certain goods. And then South Africa is a capital poor country with a lack of investment in machinery and equipment. We rely very heavily on imports of capital goods. So it will be difficult for the country to substitute all goods, but some of the goods cannot be substituted because the country cannot afford to have them on its own. Our lack of capital resources reduces our ability to produce certain consumer goods and services. So because of lack of capital, local firms cannot afford to do what? To produce certain consumer goods and services. It does not necessarily lead to an overall reduction in imports. To manufacture consumer goods, we import capital and intermediate goods. So it will always be difficult for us to compromise some of imported goods and services. It is going to take many years before we would be able to produce luxury goods. So we will always import luxury goods since we cannot afford to produce them. As a result, it is impossible for the country to substitute luxury goods because we cannot produce them as a country. Isolation from the international competition. Local business might be isolated from the international competition because they are protected. This can result to them being unable to compete internationally. And then we continue, consumers pay higher prices for local goods. Locally produced goods may be more expensive than the imported goods as local businesses might not be very efficient due to lack of competition. This might compromise the quality of local goods as compared to import. So the quality of imported goods might be compromised because there is no much higher competition that businesses are facing. We continue with disadvantages, retaliation. So countries can retaliate by imposing more tariffs on South African exports. Retaliation might also include physical bans and sanctions of some South African exported goods and services. This can increase the scarcity of some basic capital goods as the country might be excluded from competing or interacting with specific countries. So because of that, we may not as a country access some capital goods and some machinery for us to produce goods and services. We continue with the disadvantages, dependence on the government production. So a local firm might not be able to compete in the open market where there is no government intervention. Government production reduces competition and decreases the level of efficiency. If ever the government intervenes by protecting local businesses, businesses tend to be very much inefficient because the competition tends to be less for them. Nothing is pushing them to deliver at the highest. So as a result, they tend to be very much inefficient. This might lead to local consumers buying poor quality of or deficient goods or products from the local market. Local market might end up providing deficient or poor quality of goods and services within the local market because of what? Because they are no longer facing the huge international competition. And then the next part is the protectionism. Remember, we said we have a protectionism and free trade. So now we are talking about the protectionism, which is a part of our essay in our new examination guideline. The protectionism, it's relating to the import substitution, but not really. Here, the government also make use of import tariffs and restrictions to prevent imported goods from entering the country, with the aim of protecting local industries against the foreign or international unfair competition from strategic industries or multinational industries. Protectionism is the implementation of policies to protect domestic producers against effects of the foreign unfair competition by means of tariffs on imported goods, quotas, and other means of reducing imports. This is when the government also tried to reduce imports by protecting local industries from being manipulated or exploited, not being able to stand that competition or international competition by strategic industries or big industries from abroad. Since the open market does not cater for any protection, government takes some protective measures to safeguard their firms as they are less industrialized. When multinational or strategic industries compete with infant industries, the competition become unfair. If local firms can compete with the multinational industries, the competition will be very much unfair because these multinationals are producing at the economic of scale. They produce at the lower cost and sell at the lower cost, while our local firms are producing at the higher cost and sell at the higher cost per unit. So infant industries, these are the arguments in favor of protectionism. It's an essay. Infant industries. A newly established industry often lacks experience and has high fixed costs because of short production runs. These high production costs make it impossible to compete against established international firms with lower production costs. So in this case, infant industries cannot simply compete easily with the international strategic industries because strategic industries are producing at the economies of scale, while our local industries are producing at the economies of scale. So the competition in there will be difficult for infant industries to stand. For certain industries to be established and prosper, they need some. They need some form of protection against already established foreign producers until they can stand their own feet. So, for these local firms to be able to compete openly, they need to be protected by the government against these foreign industries that are very much industrialized. We'll continue with the infant industries. Competing becomes even more difficult if established industries use unfair trade methods such as dumping and price wars. If ever foreign firms that are within the country are using dumping and price wars, it will be very much difficult for local firms to compete openly. Established industries have economies of scale advantage over infant industries. That's when those foreign firms are producing at the economies of scale, while our local firms are producing at the economies of scale. Temporary protective measures will prevent a decline in the growth of the local industry. Our local industries cannot simply decline because they are protected by the government. Protecting strategic industries and becoming nationally independent. The strategic industries are very important for maintaining national independence and national security. Those are industries such as Eskom in South Africa that are very much important. They should be protected against the competition. These include products that may be essential in times of war or conflict when sanctions are applied, in times of international depression or after the natural disaster. Protection should be granted to key industries, for example, the iron, steel industry, and agriculture deserve protection because they provide us with the crucial and important products within the economy. Protecting strategic industries continues. Producers of food, fuel, and energy such as electricity, military, weapons, all have strategic importance for the country. They are very important for the safety of the country and also for the survival of the country. So it is very important that those industries are protected. It is important to ensure that there is always an adequate supply of essential goods and services, and that the supply of these goods does not depend on conditions of foreign countries. So these essential goods should be made available by local industries because they are required regularly for the country to operate. So the country should not depend mostly on foreign countries to get those goods and services. So those industries, local that are providing these goods, should be protected. The failure to protect local strategic industries result to the country becoming vulnerable. The country will be more vulnerable in case of some incidences because the country failed to protect its own strategic industries. We continue. It promotes employment opportunities. Trade protection is a measure to control unemployment. So it results to more employment opportunities because now goods will not be imported in the large quantity into the country. That will mean local firms will be able to produce more and more firms will be established within the country. One way of doing this is to protect the jobs of workers who are currently working. This can only happen if the businesses that employ them can continue to produce and sell goods in the face of foreign competition. So in this case, firms that have employed some people to produce particular goods in the country should be encouraged to continue with the production of these goods and services so that employment will keep on increasing. Because if ever the firm decide, if the government decide to allow those goods to be imported, that will lead to consumers demanding imported goods, which will lead to employees losing their job because now the demand for these goods have declined within the local economy. By restricting foreign goods entering the country, domestic business can produce more and employ more people. So, like I've said, it will lead to more job creation because local firms will be able to produce more and employ more workers if ever firms are protected. New businesses will also be able to enter the market to create even more jobs. So there will be establishment of new businesses to compete within the market if ever local firms are protected against the foreign unfair competition. It prevents dumping. We know that dumping occurs when the firm sells its goods and sells at the foreign country at the lowest cost than in the country of origin. Dumped goods are goods which are deemed to be unnecessary and unwanted in the country of origin. If goods are the part of the dumping, that means those goods are no longer necessary in the country of origin. That's why they are sold, they are wasted into the particular country at the lowest possible cost, which kills that foreign market because those businesses that are supplying the same product are selling the product at the higher cost. Dumping makes it very difficult for local producers to compete. Local firms cannot easily compete because of dumping due to the fact that foreign goods are selling at the lowest possible cost, but while the same goods that are produced locally are sold at the higher cost, then consumers will always opt for cheap goods that are imported than buying the locally produced expensive goods of the same nature. The foreign firms gain market share and pushes local producers out of the market through dumping. So local firms might be driven out of the market because of the dumping. So that allow foreign firms to gain that advantage over our local firms. Stabilizing exchange rate and BOP or balance of payment. Governments, especially those with the free floating exchange rate systems, must monitor international trade conditions to help maintain balance of payments. If ever we are facing the situation of more imports flowing in, if our local firms are not protected, there will be lower level of exported goods and services. At the same time, there will be more imported goods and services, which will cause instability in our balance of payment. Protectionism helps to prevent the value of imports increasing at the faster than the rate of export. So if ever we have protectionism policy, the rate of imports will be less. We will not face the situation of having more imports than exportation. A too high level of imports in relation to exports cause an unsustainable deficit on the current account of the balance of payment. If ever there are more imports because local firms are not protected, that will lead to what? That will lead to the BOP or balance of payments current account being very much vulnerable and having much deficit than when it is protected. We continue with the argument stabilizing exchange rate and BOP. Imports then need to be decreased, and this can be done through protection such as imposing tariffs on imported goods and services. This will improve the balance of payment or balance of trade, exchange rate, and competitive situation of the country. The country can be able to be much better in terms of balance of trade. Exchange rate can also be better, and also the country can always be competitive. Natural resources are protected from exploitation. Remember that the government have a duty to protect our local natural resources from being overused. So, under conditions of free trade, a country's natural resources will be depleted sooner since it leads to high level of consumption. Under free trade, it tends to be overused. But with protectionism, implementing some policies that lead to conservation of proper utilization of natural resources. Such policies will ensure the survival of these industries as well as secondary industries dependent on these raw materials. So they will last longer, and local industries that depend on this raw material can keep on having or accessing these natural resources if ever there's a protection imposed by the government. Any government revenues. We know that if ever there's a protectionism, the government imposes more tariffs, which earn the government more revenues or more government revenues. Since businesses will have to pay more tax on their imports, then government will enjoy more revenues in them. In developing countries, the domestic tax base is very small because of low income of individuals and businesses. Low income do not provide much in the form of income taxes. As a result, protectionism increases state revenues. Since in the developing countries, people are earning less amount of money, it tends to be very much difficult for them to pay more tax, so they pay less taxation. So the implementation of protectionism policy allow the state to increase its tax revenues, maintain the standard of living. Imports from countries with relatively low wages represent unfair competition and threaten the standard of living for the higher paid workers of the local industries. Because now those imports coming into the lower, selling at the lower cost will compromise our local goods that are produced in those firms and result to those people being threatened as they produce those goods and services. If domestic businesses are under threat from international competition, they must reduce their production cost and remain competitive. And then this can be done by dismissing workers or reducing wages and salaries. So either way, workers can be retrained or wages can be reduced if ever businesses are not very much benefiting because of high level of imports. In countries with high level of poverty and income inequality, it is important that wages remain stable. This will ensure that the standard of living does not decrease, but instead it can remain at the good level or increases further. Furthermore, revenues from customs and excise duties is an important source of revenue that can be used to reduce poverty and spread income more evenly within the country. So it is very important that the government imposes these taxes on protection or on imported goods and services so that there will be more revenues and so that the government can be able to reduce economic inequalities and redistribute income and wealth. Diversifying the industrial base. Countries need to develop diversified industries to prevent disadvantages of over-specialization. So there should be diversity in terms of economy. Industry should be able to produce variety of goods and services. A country that relies heavily on export only a few products is very vulnerable. The countries should be able to export variety of goods and services into the international market. If a developing country's employment and income is dependent on only one or two industries, there is a risk that wealth fluctuation in the prices and supply and demand side problems could result in significant fluctuation in the domestic economic activities. If countries are very much dependent on two or more industries, that can lead to the country becoming more vulnerable because any fluctuation internationally can result to this business not doing well, then the economy of the country will be compromised. Import restriction may be imposed on a range of products in order to ensure that several domestic industries develop. Imposing these import restrictions result to development of several industries within the country, allowing the country to produce variety of goods and services, which is a part of diversity. And then now another part is a free trade. That's when there are no restrictions that are put in place by the government. Firms can simply import and export goods without any regulation. So that is regarded to be free trade. No tariffs are imposed. Free trade refers to the absence of trade barriers or restrictions on trade between countries. When there are no trade barriers or restrictions, that is regarded to be a free trade. The supporters of the free trade argue that it is only under condition of free trade that countries can specialize in production of those goods that they have an advantage in. So free trade allows businesses to pay or countries to do specialization because they can simply supply more of what they are good at and supply to the entire international market. But it is also a bad thing because in the developing countries, those countries tend to be over-reliant on those goods that are imported from other countries. They do not get a chance to develop. As a result, the economic welfare of everybody increases. Emerging economies are, however, not favored by the free trade policy because they have less to share with the other world countries, and that can make them more dependent than being self-sufficient or self-reliant. That's what I've just said before. Arguments in favor of free trade, economies of scale. If ever firms are facing, or if countries are facing free trade, firms can produce more goods and services at the low cost and sell them at the low cost. So that can lead to the economies of scale. Increased world trade lead to bigger markets, more investment in the production process, and lower cost of production. Once a producer has invested in production capacity, it makes sense to produce as much as possible as the average cost of production falls as more is produced. Economies of scale benefit consumers as low production costs lead to low prices. We continue with the arguments in favor of free trade. Specialization and efficiency. Producing for the international market provide a firm with the incentive to produce as much as possible at the lowest possible cost, which means it becomes more efficient. The profit motive will encourage less wastage and better production methods. Countries can specialize in the production activities in which they have competitive advantage. So firms can specialize the most if ever there's a free trade. Freedom of choice and increased welfare for consumers. Tariffs and quotas reduce the quantity of variety of goods available to consumers. Therefore, with tariffs being reduced, consumers find themselves having a choice at the lower cost. Foreign goods that are imported are more expensive due to the excise taxes or custom duties. Free trade increases the range of choice that is available to consumers and reduce the general price. So there will be a social welfare gain in there. Free trade allows consumers the wide choice of what to buy from the whole world and not just from what is produced locally. So consumers find themselves with a variety of choices to buy from any other country, as goods can be imported at the lower costs due to the fact that import tariffs are not included. Consumer welfare is increased because of the free trade through the free choices. Improve international relations. When countries use trade barriers, it results to retaliation. So countries tend to retaliate and impose tariffs against one another because of trade barriers. But with free trade, relations tend to improve between world countries. In the end, everybody pays high prices and the total output is reduced as trade is reduced because of restrictions. This leads to poor relations between countries and reduces the chances of international cooperation on issues that are mutually beneficial. Countries cannot simply benefit within the protectionism, but within the free trade, countries tend to benefit because they can share. Implementing best practices. As a result of the competition on international markets, companies are forced to implement the best production method, the newest technology and management systems to improve continuously. So this allows businesses to improve even further because of international competition being open freely without any restriction. This results to consumers worldwide having access to quality of goods at reasonable prices. So the quality of goods will always increase at the lower prices because of the free trade, since barriers and restrictions are not in place. We continue the argument innovation. So we know that if ever there's a free trade, countries tend to be very much innovative. Businesses tend to develop and adopt latest technology because they face huge competition. A lack of free trade often leads to domestic markets being dominated by few enterprises who avoid competing amongst themselves. Competition provides powerful incentive to innovative. So firms can be very much innovative and creative if ever there's a huge competition that is created by the free trade. Not only new goods and services are made available on the market, but businesses also compete to find production methods that cut costs and improve the quality of goods. So business will always try to find new way that will ensure that they cut cost of production and improve the quality of goods. Then they can sell goods that are at the good quality into the economy and at the lower cost. And then the desirable mix. In this case, we talk about economic integration, whereby countries get together and form some trade blocs that allow them to easily participate in the economy and trade with one another without any trade restrictions or tariffs being imposed. So it is done through, we have here the import substitution and export promotion policies that were discussed before in a form of desirable mix and evaluation. Import substitution and export promotion should not be seen as opposites because they are all used to achieve the same objective. If you promote exports, you encourage local goods to be exported to the global market, and that leads to economic growth. If you substitute imports, you deprive foreign goods from entering the country so that local firms can be able to grow. So either way, they have the same objective. Import substitution can lead to export promotion. Some countries were not successful in starting with the import substitution, then they moved to the export promotion policy. We continue. Some other developing countries may also benefit from focusing on export promotion instead of import substitution. A dual strategy of combining import substitution and export promotion is also possible. If you do both, you promote export, you substitute import, then economy can grow faster. It is true though that recently those countries focusing on export promotion underperformed countries that focus on import substitution. Protectionism and free trade comes in under desirable mix again. If we use both policies in place, once the country has decided what mix of free trade or protectionism best suit its economy, it needs to find countries that have similar objectives. So countries need to find those countries that are having a same objective if ever they need free trade or protectionism. This will ensure that trading partners are chosen that are willing to trade under the conditions set. So in this case, countries will set some conditions together and be able to comply within those conditions and achieve their objectives. Trade agreements that set rules of trade are called trade protocols. We continue. The trade protocols have the combined effect of increasing the amount of trade that occurs between countries, but also restricting it by laying down rules for the way in which it occurs. Trade blocs make use of free trade and protectionism or protection. Member countries pursue free trade with one another, but apply trade restrictions to non-member countries. And then economic integration now. That's when we move to the trade protocols. 4 of them will be discussed here. We talk about economic cooperations, which refers to any combined action taken by 2 or more governments in partnership to promote interest of their own countries. That is known as economic cooperation, when countries are getting together to achieve the common objective. Economic integration refers to the removal of trade barriers that restrict the free flow of goods and services, as well as factors of production between countries. That is known to be economic integration. Then we have number 1 here, which is free trade areas. So this occurs when member countries remove all trade restrictions between themselves. If ever South Africa is getting together with maybe Brazil and Russia, they will be removing trade barriers between themselves. So they will be trading freely between themselves. But what happens in there? Are free to apply whatever restrictions with non-member countries. Any country that is not the member of that bloc will have to be charged in any way in terms of tariffs. So under free trade areas, we talk about situations whereby countries get together and decide to remove all trade restrictions between themselves. So whenever they trade with one another, they don't have to pay anything. But then non-member countries will have to face tariffs imposed on them because they are not the members of the bloc. And then custom unions. So this is the development of free trade areas even further. The free trade area is taken to the next step. Member countries remove all trade restrictions between themselves and apply the same restriction to non-member countries. So in this case, non-member countries now are charged the same tariffs by these member countries, and none of them can increase or decrease the tariff without any common agreement. So member countries remove all restrictions against one another, but they impose common restrictions against the non-member countries in here. And none of these countries can be able to influence or change tariffs that have been agreed upon. No country can reduce or increase restrictions without being in contravention on the custom union agreement. The common market. In this case, we develop even further now. That's when the custom unions are taken to the next step. Member countries decide to increase the level of economic integration between themselves now. What do? In this case, member countries will try to ensure that there is a free movement of labor, capital, and money between these countries. So within the borders of these countries, it will be easy for them to mobilize labor from one country to another for free, mobilize capital from one country to another for free. So that will make it very much easy for them. So that's a development further. And then people may live and work anywhere they wish in the common market. So if the country is using common market with its own trade blocks, that will mean people can travel to these countries freely without any tariffs and restrictions being imposed, and they can work anywhere. There will be movement of capital and labor freely without any restriction being imposed. And then the last one is economic and monetary union. This is the biggest one. This is the highest form of economic integration. So now big decisions are taken here. Member countries agree to adopt a single currency, number one, and the same central bank for determining the monetary policy like interest rates. So under this one, which is economic and monetary union, it is the biggest one that allow countries now to simply decide on agreeing upon the same currency that can be used between themselves. Same central bank on determining the policy, the likes of interest rate. So this is the biggest one. Taxes are also made uniform as the member countries adopt a common fiscal policy. So taxes are made to be common because because fiscal policy adopted become common or tend to be the same between these countries. So in that case, we talk about the economic union or the monetary union. So these are the four main protocols that are used under economic integration. The free trade areas, we have the common market, economic union, as well as, yeah. And then it is very important that you know the entire thing that we have touched on. If I can simply browse back, export promotion is an essay. It's a long question. And then in there, you talk about approaches, advantages, disadvantages, which advantages are also reasons. And then you go to the arguments in favor of protectionism. That's an essay again. You need to ensure that you know everything in there so that you can be fit to respond to any kind of examination that you might be coming across during the year, even during the final examination. Providing you the summary, it is very important that you cover the whole thing. This section is not bad. It's an enjoyable chapter if you can check. It is very important that you know your definitions thoroughly because the multiple choice, you come across them. Remember, this topic we have just covered, it's a part of economic pursuit. Economic pursuit is a part of our paper 1 under the question 1, the question 3, and the part of question 4 as well as question 6. So within this topic, there are 2 essays, meaning we have 2 questions for section C here that are found in question 6. Export promotion as well as arguments in favor of protectionism. And then be able to distinguish between the two. Export promotion, import substitution. If we promote export, that means the government is trying to support local businesses to be very much competitive in the global market, to produce more goods and services and be able to supply the entire foreign market. That allow local firms to even grow within the country because as they are exporting, they will be able to produce the large quantity of goods and services at the lower cost. That will allow them to increase their capacity within the country and the capacity for the entire international market. That leads to more job creation because there will be more demand for labor. If you talk about import substitution, that's when we talk about replacement of former imported goods and services. Those goods that were imported before are no longer imported, but they are produced locally by local businesses. And that allows our local businesses to grow because they are protected now by the government through the use of tariffs and quotas. Meaning, imports become more expensive locally, while our local firms, our local consumers now will decide not to demand imported goods because imported goods are now expensive due to higher tariffs. Then they will demand locally produced goods and services, which allow our local firms to grow even further within the country. And then if we talk about protectionism and free trade, it's different again. The protectionism, it is the use of tariffs as well as quotas and all restrictions to prohibit the entry of imported goods and services with the main aim of protecting local industries against the foreign or international unfair competition. Remember, all local firms are infant firms or infant industries. In that case, they need to be protected because if they can compete openly with the global industries that are well established and well industrialized. They cannot be able to compete easily because those industries are producing at the economies of scale while our local firms are producing at these economies of scale. Our local firms are not having much subsidies, but foreign firms might be subsidized by foreign governments. When they enter the market, they simply compete easily. So that discourages our local firms. Therefore, the government should intervene by protecting our local firms against that unfair competition. And then free trade that goes in this manner. That's when countries can simply trade with one another for free without any restriction being imposed. That allows firms to even specialize, countries to choose goods that they are good at and specialize to supply the entire market. But that result to developing economies or emerging economies finding some challenges because they have less to offer in the international market. Therefore, it will be difficult for them to develop because they will be more dependent. It will improve dependence into the foreign businesses or foreign countries instead of developing their very own goods and services. It will also exhaust natural resources because they will be over-consumed due to the fact that it's a free trade that is occurring within the country. And then you have economic integration. That's when we talk about comparison in the usage of export promotion and import substitution. That can be used together at the same time. But countries choose the best combination that works. Some can choose export promotion, some can choose import substitution, but mostly countries that have adopted initially export promotion have been able to dominate than those that have chosen import substitution, because import substitution comes with mostly wars between countries, but export promotion can likely be friendly if countries are doing it within, amongst each other. And then, if you talk about the what we call free trade and protectionism, it is difficult for the country to adopt free trade and the protectionism at the same time. But in specific goods, some goods can be of the free trade between some countries, some can be protected because one country can be able to supply its own market. And then economic integration, that's when you talk about trade protocols, 4 of them that need to be known. With this being said, I thank you. I believe this lesson will have a great impact as you will be preparing for any upcoming assessment. Enjoy it.